What's up? This is your man, the STL Stranger Umar Lee. I'm producer extraordinaire. Mark Law is taking of some fabulous nourishment in St. Louis right now. And I am joined by guest extraordinaire who we've had in here before a few times, the incomparable St. Louis zone, Chaminade's own, Sunflower Project's own Richard Reilly.
Well, greetings, Umar. Thanks for having me.
No problem, man. So we got a lot of things going on right now. A lot of things in the world, a lot of things in St. Louis. But before we get into all the deep and heavy stuff, let's go back a little bit and get a little philosophical about life and just where we at it, or where we are at on our journeys. Okay.
Gotcha.
So you work with the environment. You're an environmental guy. You're a green guy. You're about sustainable energy and
I'm about all those things. And I got put in that direction during a 30 plus year career in the construction industry.
So when I think of green, first thing I think of is, well, a few different things. I got a good buddy of mine, Todd Nelson, a great writer, by the way. He lives in Washington, D.C. He's always drinking these green smoothies every day. And he's threatening to make me drink one next time I visit D.C. And I told him, I said, look, man, if you want to drink something green, you can celebrate Irish heritage at McDonald's in late February through mid-March with the Shamrock Shake. So we can drink that green together. And of course, there's the green of money, which we all need money. No money, no honey. And there's the green of course, our vegetables, but it's also green associated with marijuana. And I was just looking at 60. I don't know if you watched 60 Minutes last night. Did you get a chance to watch 60 Minutes?
No, sure didn't.
So they had a segment about the marijuana industry in California. And it was actually a pretty interesting episode. I got to say, they interviewed Biden. And then they did a thing on marijuana and a thing on pandas. Of course, pandas related to the environment as well, because so much of their the lands where pandas were historically are urbanization, et cetera.
I hear you.
So the marijuana industry is growing, is booming. Many states have legalized. Missouri passed medical. Illinois did full legalization, and I was told last week that they have dispensaries up just on the east side of the St. Louis metropolitan area. Can you confirm that, Richard? Can you buy weed over in Belleville now legally? Cahokia, East St. Louis?
I have no idea.
Okay. Because I know there's legalization, but then it takes them a while to get up to speed and open up the shops and stuff like that. So you're a Catholic school guy. You went to Chaminade. Were they smoking weed when you were in high school, or was that?
Oh my God, yes.
You're smoking a lot of weed. Okay.
A lot of weed.
Yeah. What year did you graduate?
1977.
Oh, 77. Okay. 1977. Riverview Gardens won the state wrestling championship. Really great Riverview team. Rocky Streb, many other great wrestlers that year. So this is 77. So. You're really talking about, as far as I'm concerned, the best decade in music ever, in America at least. I mean, you had Motown and Philly Soul, just that great.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree more.
Yeah? Oh, man.
I think the 60s in music ended about 1972.
Really? So here's what I'm thinking. Tell me where I'm wrong. Okay, so I'm thinking of 70s in three camps. I'm thinking of the soul music of the 70s, right? Both out of Motown and then out of Philadelphia, with Kenny Gamble and that whole outfit.
Right.
I'm thinking of the outlaw country that was popular in the 70s. With David Allan Coe and Merle Haggard and Willie Nelson and that whole thing, right? Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash.
Right. Oh yeah, I saw the Leonard Skinner band before the plane crash.
Is that right? In St. Louis at a
Yeah,
concert?
back in 75 or 6, maybe.
Okay, and then you had the classic rock of the '70s. All the
Oh yeah,
great rock bands. So to me, I mean, and I don't listen to too much new music. It's not because I don't believe anything good is coming out. It's because I just don't have time to research it. Like if I listen to something new, it's usually by word of mouth, or like I heard about it on NPR or something like that, right? But all of those rock, country, soul music at that time, for the first time in the '70s, where you had a little bit in the '60s, they're openly singing about smoking marijuana. Like smoking weed is a thing in the lyrics,
sure. All
and
kinds of drugs, really.
all kinds of drugs, right? Right. So was the seven? I mean, so that was a big thing at Chaminade. So being that you're of kind of like the older generation that kind of grew up with weed, right? Whereas young people now think they're the first people to discover weed, right? But it's been around for a long time, right? Uh, at what point do you think full legalization is going to come nationwide? Just it's going to be legal everywhere, and because
Well, I think as revenue sources are needed, it will become more and more legal. And I think because of the search for revenue will be the reason that it happens. And, as to what decade that happens, I'm not really sure. I've got no particular personal interest in it. Smoked some in high school, a little bit in college, but just was never a big thing for me.
not really your thing. You enjoy a beer, but
Yeah, I have a couple of beers every day, and that's about it. Um, the I did have some really good weed once with a buddy of mine who was from Belleville,
mm-hmm.
and his name was John McIntyre. May he rest in peace.
R.I.P.
And
John McIntyre.
yeah, he's quite a bit older than me. He passed away a few years ago, and he was the road manager in the early days, and then again in the '80s for the Grateful Dead.
Mm.
And
Plenty of weed spoke in that whole scene.
yeah. So whatever stuff he came up with that once, man, that was good.
I mean, I'm not a big weed smoker either. I smoked some weed one time with my friend Ismail Royer, who went on to be convicted of terrorism and spent 14 years in prison. But he was a West County guy, and they had some really good weed. And like I lost the feeling of my leg. I was like laying on the waterbed, and I couldn't get up. And so I was like, man, I don't really want to be this high. Like it's not.
Yeah.
I'll still smoke every blue moon, but I'm not a big
Yeah.
weed smoker. It's not really my thing.
Yeah. Well, if you get high and you lose your exit strategy, that's a problem.
That's a problem, right? And you don't want to get caught in the wrong place. Well, that's my whole thing with intoxication. Period. Is I'm always on edge. I basically have to be just many different things going on, and I don't want to be out in public or out somewhere, and I don't have my faculties. I don't have my ability to respond to a fast moving situation. So I think if you have a more laid back life, like we don't have people like that want to kill you and stuff like that. I think you can be a little more comfortable being intoxicated in public.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at, Mr. Reilly. So what projects are you working on today? Since you're not working on weed, I know a lot of people working on legalization. What's the big thing you got going on right now?
Well, there's a handful of things. I'm starting with the Community Arts Training Institute. It's something that the Regional Arts Commission puts together. So I'll be what's called a CAT fellow and do a training with a cohort of 16 or 17 others when we learn how to figure out how to do socially engaged art projects in communities around town and help on the education side of life through the use of the arts. So for me, this might be about sustainability, which is one of my big green things. And in the world of sustainability, you got a stool supported by 3 legs, and the top of that stool is the world, and the 3 legs that hold it up are economic, environmental, and social. and you pull one of those legs out and that stool comes tumbling down. So in St. Louis, I want to see those 3 legs put under a stool in our region that makes sense for all the people of the region as soon as possible. And if arts is just one pathway to educating folks to that end, well, then I'm all for it, and I'll try and put in the work. It's kind of similar to at least one project I've been involved in, which is the Sunflower Plus project, which is a little about placemaking, a little about sustainability, a little about playing some place where you can hang, and it's a little bit about something beautiful. Let's plant some flowers instead of putting in a bunch of weeds we have to cut down. So that's one big thing. Another is my work on the housing committee and the board of directors at Dutchtown South Community Corporation. So I really hope to be effective there in helping Dutchtown maintain a good stock of affordable housing, to help people who own homes there that might be of limited means, perhaps get perhaps get a fix on their property tax. So if other people come in, their taxes don't push them out of the neighborhood. So it's a work for me that is about minimizing and eliminating, really, if I can do it, displaced people from the Dutchtown South community, because I think people ought to be able to stay where they put down some roots, no matter who else wants to live next door. That's 2 big things. Always taking pictures and spending whatever time on the street I can when events are happening to document those. I think I'm in the process of donating several thousand pictures from Ferguson and Stockley era to the Missouri History Museum.
People don't know Richard Reilly. He's a photographer. And if you go to protests, he's literally always there with his camera. You know, he's always snapping about.
Yeah.
So if you see a tall, bald-headed white guy with a white beard, that is, in fact, Richard Reilly.
Yeah, but I belong behind the camera, and so that's why I carry one in front of me. And but so those I'd be in Missouri History Museum's archive and accessible to everybody for research and use. And that's a whole project. All the protest photography, I've never accepted a dime for, and the donation doesn't come with any money, and it also comes with the expectation that no money will be made on the photographs of people who are basically fighting for their lives, right?
Right.
Pretty much what takes them to the street. And so that's just about trying to be a good member of the community and document the passionate work of others, right? Full of anger, fear, and righteous calls for justice. And it needs to be documented. So I try and do my part.
That's what's up. And do you feel in this era, so we're in 2019, the latter half of 2019 now, coming up on Halloween in a couple of days. I just early voted down here for the elections in Texas, which is just ballot initiatives for next week.
Gotcha.
But 1 week from next week is the presidential election, and the primaries are going to start in a few months.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know when Missouri hits the schedule or Texas. I mean, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, they're up there near the beginning. What is the feeling you're getting in St. Louis right now? Because I tell you what, down here in Texas, it's becoming a swing state. it's getting tighter because of demographic changes in the state. Just 150,000 people moving to the Dallas metro every year. A lot of them coming from blue states. A lot
Yeah.
of them from diverse populations. Et cetera. So it's tightening up here. But I do see a lot of Trump supporters here, and I've talked to quite a few of them. I've argued with a couple of them. What is the climate like in St. Louis right now? I mean, I know you're in the city, you're in Tower Grove, you're in like a very progressive neighborhood, but
Yeah.
you're out and about. You're driving around. Are you seeing a lot of Trump support in the St. Louis metro?
I think there's a fair amount of conservative support in the St. Louis metro. So that's like South and West County, not completely by any means. But when I attend meetings professionally and sometimes otherwise with folks who aren't from the 15th ward like me, I am sometimes just shocked by the attitudes and I don't know, just what is the baseline core beliefs of a lot of people who really seem to think that the smallest segment of society that we should be talking about is that of the individual. And by that I mean those folks are like, hey, I made it, you should make it too. You're not trying hard enough. Any individual can make it. And to me, that's a fundamentally perverse view of our political and social relations. I look at things like, hey, it's pretty obvious we're all in this together. And if we don't figure out how to make it work for all of us, we're going to continue to have some pretty awful problems. And folks just don't care about that in a lot of spaces. I have to go into, probably more so for work than any other reason. And so that's kind of a bummer, in the city, around my neighborhood and other parts of the city that I hang out in, which includes both sides of Del Mar. I think, nobody supports Trump, not by a long shot. And then you get some people fighting about Bernie or Liz or whatever,
Right, because that's going to be a pretty heated primary coming up, I'd assume.
Yeah, I guess it will be. To me, it's just kind of like let's see who starts to emerge as real candidates, and let's see what their positions end up being like. And I think you also have to take into account what is the makeup of the Senate and the Congress going to look like if these people are elected. So you can have plans and programs and policies and things you want to do, but if you take the oath of office when the Senate and the Congress aren't going to let you do anything, right?
Right.
What are you going to end up with? So part of
Well,
it.
that's the issue that both Obama and Trump, they
Yeah.
promised a lot to their followers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obama, people forget. People have very short memories. Just in 2008, people forget how much enthusiasm.
Oh yeah.
There were people selling Obama merchandise all on the street corners of St. Louis.
Yeah.
There were stores that had dedicated entire aisles to Obama
Yeah.
merchandise.
Oh, I couldn't have been more excited in 2008.
I remember a cab driver for the Clee cab had his entire front of his cab with portraits of the Obama family. Sasha, Malia, Michelle, Barack,
Yeah.
even the mother-in-law, right? I remember having passengers in my taxi who believed that once Obama got in, he was going to free all African Americans from prison. He was going to free their boyfriends, free their family members, etc. There was this like real enthusiasm for Obama, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of it was from people who may not have completely understood how the system works. Like, he's not a, absolute monarchy. He can't get in and do whatever he wants to do, right? And he may not
Right.
even have the inclination to do what you think he wants to do, right? And So I would argue he did not have a transformative presidency. He had pretty much a run-of-the-mill presidency. Some bright
Oh,
spots, some
I
not so much.
agree. I think you could compare a lot of things he did and a lot of policies that he favored were at least as conservative, if not more so, than stuff Reagan did.
Right. And so Trump comes in, and he's promising all this stuff to his followers. Some he did act on, some he did achieve, but I don't think he fundamentally understood how the system works, because I read many reports that he got in and he couldn't figure out why, he's the president. Why can't he do this? Why can't he do that? Well, he
Right.
has Congress, same thing with the Affordable Care Act, with Obamacare. You know, he had a Republican Congress fighting that the whole way. So if Bernie gets elected, Elizabeth Warren gets elected, whoever. I mean, I see three. I mean, it's pretty much a two-horse race in the polls right now between Warren and Biden. But you still have a few months, and a lot of things can happen in that time period. Someone can sneak up. Whoever gets it, just remember how hard it was to get the Affordable Care Act. Okay, which was a very meek thing. It was not.
Right. Oh, heck, it's got Republican roots.
Right. Think of how hard that was and how it's been watered down ever since and all that stuff. Okay. And so imagine what something even more transformative, what kind of a congressional fight you would have in your hand, what kind of fight you would have with state legislatures, with conservative judges, et cetera. So that's all part of it. You're in a system where you got to get things through Congress, and it's not just about who you elect as president, and you got to juxtapose the two. What can we get? So I think it's very interesting. I mean, it's a primary season. I'm seeing a lot of enthusiasm down here. I'm seeing Kamala Harris bumper stickers. I saw a guy with his car completely Bidened out. I mean, like the window, Biden, like big Biden stuff.
Somebody got enthusiastic about Uncle Joe.
Yeah, some people got enthusiastic about old Sleepy Joe. And then, I was in St. Louis last time. I seen Buttigieg yard signs. I've seen a lot of Bernie stuff wherever I've been. I'm seeing more and more Elizabeth Warren, stuff. So, I mean, everyone has their own, you got 20-something candidates, everyone has their own person. I haven't seen any Justek bumper stickers, I have to say, but.
Well, I think you're definitely, right about how difficult it would be to say all of a sudden Medicare for all and get something like that through Congress. So some of this stuff is setting a path that may take, a decade or two to realize. And I think that the transformation from, say, Keynesian to neoliberal economics took decades, before people like Reagan and Thatcher fully picked that stuff up. And some of it has to do with the level of political discourse we have, and how conservatives are willing to talk and have been willing to talk for 30 years compared to, say, liberals. And I don't count myself among either one of those groups. But the fact of it is what's acceptable conversation around some of these issues that need to have political support built underneath them will take a long time. And I think a lot of political discourse, if people want things to move to the left regarding social welfare, reparations, different things like that, which I'm all for, is going to take a concerted effort at a discourse that's far to the left, at least in a lot of places, than it is now, in order to move the center back to where it was more or less when Roosevelt was president. And, so that's kind of a long-term project. And I think that people who speak so much about their centrist views and this, that, and the other thing are really missing the boat to move, I think, what's often referred to as the Overton window, right? To move the spectrum of allowed political discourse to the left of where it is today. and that's just work that has to be done. And so people got to do it. And if Bernie's been one of the people who have moved that thing to the left, probably farther than anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Mark really likes Bernie. He has a certain appeal to a lot of people. And, I kind of got it last time around, the enthusiasm, you had like this
Yeah.
planned ordination of like Hillary, and like there wasn't really a real process. So he was a guy here challenging and bringing up some new and fresh ideas that a lot of people have picked up. Like a lot of
Right.
people picked up Bernie. But I mean, I think you also have other sides of Bernie that
Oh, right. I think he's
are,
definitely got.
are
Uh,
less appealing.
yeah. He's definitely got to hear a wake up call on some issues regarding race and a few other things that just you know he either doesn't quite get or hasn't been able to internalize well enough.
Marcus reminded me I was a Bernie bro in 2016. I would say I was Bernie bro-ish. I supported him in the primaries.
You
Uh,
got Bernie Inc., Umar?
nah, no Bernie ink, man. No Bernie ink. I don't have any tats of anything. Thank God, no tattoos. Uh, I don't have any tattoos. It'd be interesting to see. Like I'm not really a fan of the squad or this whole thing going on. So for many reasons. I mean, it could be a whole different episode in and of itself. But it's a process. It's a primary process. We'll see what happens. Uh, whoever comes out, I'll support. If
Yeah,
Bernie's a nominee, I'll vote for him. If Joe Sestak is a nominee, I'll vote for Joe. If you know Tom Steyer, you know
yeah,
Cory Booker, any of those people, it's unlikely. I just think Cory Booker should concentrate on his romance with Rosario Dawson. I mean, why would you even be concentrating on politics and you got Rosario Dawson, man? It's just like, you know, what is the presidency compared to that? So we'll see what happens. And then in St. Louis, I really believed St. Louis got hit with a 1-2 punch combination. Trump was elected, and then Lyda Crewson was elected, which a lot of people were,
yeah,
including myself, were very upset with in St. Louis. So
yeah.
we had to deal with Lyda Crewson, a Democrat on the local level, who many of us saw as someone blocking progress, as someone that wasn't going to be able to, to move the city forward. And I think
Oh,
we
yeah. I don't
realized,
think, yeah, you couldn't call her anything but a Republican in any other place but St. Louis.
yeah. Well, I always say in St. Louis, you had two political parties, the white Democrats and the black Democrats. And so even if you're Republican orientation, you do it within the Republican Party in the city of St. Louis. And we've seen nothing but high-end development, Central Corridor. We've really seen nothing of benefit for people north of Delmar,
Right.
for people in struggling neighborhoods of South St. Louis City. And I go back to the Uber Lyft fight on this. There was, when I was discussing the plight of cab drivers in St. Louis, no one wanted to come at it from the perspective of what was good for workers, what was good for professional drivers, what was good for these humans who were struggling to take care of themselves and their families. It was
Yeah.
all about how do we attract a wealthy millennials and we're almost always talking about wealthy white millennials to the city. That was all it was about. And they want Uber or whatever. Everything is about this one demographic. Everything in development is about how do we attract wealthy white millennials. And that's not a St. Louis thing. That's in Dallas going on.
Right.
They're tearing down African American and Hispanic neighborhoods at a fast rate to build these, monstrous apartment buildings and luxury housing. That's uh, in New York City, uh, DC, Philadelphia. That's all over the country. As Mark says, from Richard Ford, the creative class. That's what every city's about. Their ticket to the future is disregard for the poor, the working class, the communities of color,
Right.
and a focus on this creative class, whatever you want to call it. And Lyda Crewson has, shown no interest in anyone else but but this class. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like so many things that you see in other Rust Belt cities of when I think of Detroit, which is a lot bigger than St. Louis, I still think of their little central corridor, right?
Right.
It's something like I don't know, 8 or 10 square miles out of over 100 square miles that's been all fancied up, and so I think St. Louis runs the risk. Heck, it's practically a reality of having a city within a city, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a little enclave of people who've got a lot of money, and they end up building a bunch of stuff, and they build themselves a little island. I think that's part of why you see folks of limited means, heading out to the county. They're seeking safety,
Right.
and they're seeking what it might take just to keep going, right?
Right. They're seeking safety and better schools for the kids.
Yeah.
They think they can get out in North County. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. I mean, there's a lot of drama going on in North County too. But the bottom line is the city of St. Louis is doing nothing to keep those residents. They're
Right.
glad,
Right.
they're gladly watching
Yeah.
North St. Louis empty out. Mark, one of his big projects is on, Mill Creek, historical African American neighborhood in St. Louis, which,
Mm-hmm.
you know, was demolished in the name of urban renewal. And if you look at the photos, which Mark has, through his postcard projects and other things, has created a lot, that is the exact type of architecture, housing that is gold in America today.
Right.
People die for those row houses, for those
Yep.
historic neighborhoods. We toured on those in Mill Creek, was historically African American neighborhood, and any historically African neighborhood in St. Louis City and County, almost all of them have been major targets for bulldozing and redevelopment.
Yeah.
In the city of St. Louis, whether you got the McKee Project, whether you got Mill Creek, whether you got so many other things. Then in the county, Kenlock, Meacham Park, et cetera.
Yeah.
Uh, Meacham Park is where my mother was living before she was murdered at Meacham Park. You know what I'm saying? And that is a historically African American community in the Robertson, which no longer exists anymore.
Yeah.
So this is an historic pattern in St. Louis, to have no development plans in mind for African American residents, and then to only see that as land that could be potentially redeveloped to either bring in higher income business or residents.
Yeah. I think if you look at a city like Paris as maybe an original model, and San Francisco as like a current model of pushing all the poor folks, all the working folks to the edges,
Mm-hmm.
and the well-to-do take over the center. And if you look at climate change and different things going on with more severe weather patterns and things like that, it's almost as if I can imagine the rich folks circling the wagons and condensing themselves in a little enclave, while they leave the rest of us all around the edges to come in and help them during the daytime.
Yep.
And I know that sounds a little bit extreme,
I mean,
but
that was the Johannesburg model too. That
right,
was
right, yeah,
model.
yeah,
Live outside the city, come serve us, take
right,
care of us, and then get the hell out.
right,
But with automation, with this computer technology now, they need less and less workers. And,
right.
and another thing is, historically, when you had restaurants opening up and businesses opening up, these were jobs that were available to African American residents.
Yeah,
Okay. Now, if you go on Cherokee Street, for example, you go in the Grove, you will walk with, and you look at the staff, you would just think you're out in West County. Maybe the people,
yeah,
they're not as hygienic. They, have more tattoos. Maybe they look a little scruffy. I mean, that's all shtick, though. I mean, these don't get it twisted. These kids are from rich families, most of them, in these places. But it's that's who's taking the job,
yeah. Well,
or
yeah, and especially in the front of the house.
right, and especially in the front of the house are white kids with basically liberal arts degrees, right? They,
Yeah,
in the back of the house, right, you still have, African American, Mexican workers, etc. But especially in the front of the house, historically, a lot of those jobs were held by African Americans in the city of St. Louis.
Yeah.
And that's no longer the case. So people can shit on Applebee's all they want, shit on Chili's, shit on Steak and Shake, these chain restaurants. But at least they hire African Americans in the front of the house. I guarantee you, you open up Applebee's on Jefferson and Cherokee, you're going to have African Americans at the front of the house.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you can say, okay, the food is not locally sourced, or, all these arguments, which are, many of them are valid. That still doesn't put food on the table of somebody in the neighborhood,
Right.
That needs to pay the bills, So, that's a big factor. Like, I don't really see anyone politically in the city of St. Louis. I mean, I see discussion on social media, but when it comes down to it, at City Hall, I don't see too many people. And that's why so many people had aspirations and hopes for Deshaun Jones, city treasurer, because people, and I'm one of those people to support her, believe that she was someone that could, really kind of reset the table in addressing some of these issues. And of course, we didn't get that. We got Lottie Cruz. And
yeah. Well, yeah, 888 votes.
Looks like John Belmar's on his way out in St. Louis County. I think paid a shit can Belmar. I think that's coming today.
I made up a little meme today. You saw how the police force had been using the Punisher logo,
right,
with the blue, police flag.
Right.
I found one of those online, and I gave it the caption, "The thick blue skull," and just thinking about all those people in St. Louis County, lying to get through that case. And everything that happened there, it just seemed crazy to me.
Yeah, well,
and that's going to send him out the door,
He's going to be out the door, and I believe, here's my prediction, you heard her here first from Umar Lee on the St. Louis Peace podcast. I do believe that Belmar will run for St. Louis County executive. I believe he's going to get shit canned, and he will be the Republican nominee for the St. Louis County executive. That's what I'm expecting.
Which is only slightly better than being the Republican nominee for mayor of St. Louis.
Right. Yeah. It's getting in that territory. Exactly. It's getting in that territory. So that's even here in Dallas. Like, a lot of these older and inner ring suburbs are blue here. So that's an interesting thing. So we're watching the World Series. Got Game 6 coming up. Who are you going for, Richard Reilly?
Well, I want the Nats to win.
Me too.
Big time.
Right.
And but we'll just have to see what happens. Dropping 3 at home, man, that's got to hurt.
I mean, after jumping up 2-0, winning 2-2 in Houston, I mean, it's okay. They're getting ready to run away with this. And okay, you drop Game 3, it's okay. But now, they're down 3-2 going to Houston. I mean, if I'm a betting man, I'm putting my money on Houston right now.
Right. The only thing you can really hope is that no home team wins a game.
No home team wins a game. You can hope for that. I mean, obviously, I hate on all Texas teams. The only Texas team that I root for is the Texas Longhorns college women's basketball team, because my niece's friend.
You got family there.
Yeah, Suge Sutton. She's starting point guard on the team. So I root for her. Other than that, I'm 100% Dallas Cowboys hater, even though Ezekiel Elliott is from St. Louis.
Yeah.
I cheer for all my St. Louis people. Ezekiel Elliott, Bradley Beal and the Wizards, Jason Tatum.
Bradley Beal played basketball same place I did.
Right, Chaminade, right. Didn't Tatum go there too, or he went to John Burroughs?
Tatum went to Chaminade, and so did David Lee.
And so did David Lee. So you've had an NBA pipeline.
We all played varsity basketball at Chaminade.
Well, what you can do is just tell people, yeah, I played for the same team as David Lee.
Oh, I do. I do. And then I tell them, and I stunk. But, that was Chaminade basketball in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, they've been a powerhouse for quite some time in basketball now. I think at least since the late 80s, so.
Yeah. David Lee, maybe a little before that, put him on the map.
Yeah.
Pretty good. They're definitely not on the map when I was there.
Well, maybe you help put them on the map. Maybe,
No,
maybe as
no.
Bradley Beal's cashing them checks and living
Yeah,
it up in
yeah,
Washington, D.C., he's
yeah.
like, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Richard Riley.
Well, I talked to Frank Cusimano once, and he said, "Oh, you played ball at Chaminade. How did you survive?"
Yeah.
And that's just because it was just so bad. It was just so bad back then.
Well, what can you do, man?
Yeah.
The thing about it is, I really enjoyed playing sports growing up. You know, wrestling, fooling around
No
the
wrestling
basketball.
in Chaminade.
No wrestling in Chaminade. No wrestling at a lot of schools in Texas either. Oklahoma, right across the border, is a great wrestling state. Of course, you got
Yeah.
Oklahoma State that's won 34 team titles. Great John Smith at the helm. But um, football just sucks all the oxygen out of the room in the state of Texas. I mean, football is huge. A lot of high schools literally have football stadiums. That's how
Yeah.
big it is here.
Yeah, they make TV shows about high school football in Texas, don't they?
Friday Night Lights, man.
Yeah.
Friday Night Lights. And I watch it. It's actually one of the few shows I like. People have been recommending to me shows that, like, they recommend to me The Righteous Gemstones. That shit sucks. They recommend to me some other show on HBO. I can't remember. It's popular.
Have you seen The Handmaid's Tale yet?
No, that's on my list. I told some woman that I was talking to that I would watch it so we could talk about it. I haven't got around to it. There's another popular show on HBO. What's it about? It's like about a kind of like a Wall Street type of deal. Anyway, I watched a few episodes. I couldn't get into it. I'm like Billions, the show on Showtime. I can't get into shows about billionaires and Wall Street.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Deuce on HBO, I can get onto it. Pimps, hoes,
Yeah.
perverts.
I used to build houses for all the rich folks in St. Louis. I had enough of that back in the day.
Right. There's like a sci-fi show that just came on HBO. A lot of people are hyped about. Like they showed the Tulsa riots.
Oh, that's that
I lost.
Watchmen thing. Is that good?
I could. I'm trying. I watched episode 1. It's like really not my thing. Like the sci-fi thing is really not me. Like I like medieval fantasy, like Lord of the Rings, but I'm not into
Yeah.
to 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 sci-fi so much. So I'm trying to give it a shot. I'm trying to stick around, but the show I really want to watch is a new Forrest Whitaker show on Epix, Godfather of Harlem. Like that's right up my
Yeah.
alley, Godfather of Harlem. Gangster
Yeah.
show.
Yeah. That'd be good. Anything with him in it's good.
But I don't have that channel, Epix. So
Yeah.
it's all a hodgepodge now, like little different channels and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
um, what can I say? I still haven't seen the Joker at the theater.
If I spend money, it's on a book usually, and instead of a movie or stuff like that. But
Well,
that's
I tell you
just
what, I just bought 2 books. Okay. Well, number one, I'm reading Dominicana by Angie Cruz right now. It's a novel about a Dominican child bride who moves to New York City, and
yeah.
you can read her first book, Soledad, which is a great book. Latina author, Dominican Angie Cruz, great author, and I'm presently just bought Celestial Bodies. It's a woman from Oman. It's translated from Arabic.
Hmm.
Harthi is the name of the author, and it kind of deals with the last several generations in Oman, how they went from Bedouin peasantry to oil wealth, and how that
Yeah.
has affected family, religion, gender relations, etc. And it's an award-winning book, Celestial Bodies. You can check that out. And I bought on Audible With the Old Breed by E.B. Sledge. That is about the 1st Marine Division in Peleliu in Okinawa. And my grandfather's with the 1st Marine Division in Peleliu in Okinawa. Since he passed away a few years ago, I've wanted to read about it, and I'm going to, going to do that. So I think that that is on my reading, and I just recently finished The History of Love by Nicole Krauss. It's really a story of loss. It follows an elderly Holocaust survivor and the lost love of his life, and moving to New York City and how it all went down. What if you just finished reading Richard Reilly? What do you recommend?
There's a new biography of Susan Sontag called Sontag: Her Life and Work by Benjamin Moser, and that's good. I mean, Sontag is I don't know if you've read any of her stuff, like Against Interpretation or On Photography. She's written fiction too. She's very stimulating writer who you like love to disagree with and argue with, you know. And she had a interesting and challenging life, and you know, the biography brings her down to earth as a person with problems like most of us have and all of us have. Incredible mind, really brilliant person, and she turned out to be a classmate in graduate school with a friend of mine who was a professor who's now just a friend, a guy in his 80s out in California. Anyway, that was all pretty good and interesting. I read The Testaments, which was the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. New stuff from Margaret Atwood. And it's kind of like a page turner. You know, if you've watched the series, you can read it and kind of follow along and kind of be okay with it. And then I'm finishing up Masters of the Universe, and it's a book on neoliberal economics, concentrating on the work of Hayek and Milton Friedman and a few others. And that's my sort of commitment. Try to read a few books each year about some of the things I really can't stand, and so I can understand them a little bit better when I'm arguing about them in public, online, or any other place. But I think the upshot of the whole neoliberal economic paradigm that you know we're under right now is something that was essentially created by billionaires with their own self-interest in mind, and they basically, you know, funded university chairs, they funded think tanks, they did all this stuff to make the current popular economic theory prominent. So it's basically like our political system nowadays. It's paid for. Anyway, good book.
Mr. Richard Reilly. You'll see him around. He towers over the crowd with his camera. We got it tonight. He don't smoke a lot of weed. He does drink beer. What's your beer choice, Richard Reilly?
My favorite is Four Hands Incarnation. It's an IPA. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's pretty crafty stuff. Now, Irvin Chestnut's got this Fantasyland out, and that's mighty fine too.
Okay, well, you can always buy him some Colt 45 malt liquor.
Yeah. But basically, if somebody wants to hand me a Heilman's or a Bud Light, I'll just say no thanks. I'll have a glass of water.
Ah, there you go. No Heilman's a Bud Light, but I bet if you pass him the Colt 45, he'll drink up, man.
Oh, maybe back in the day, man. Oh man.
All right, man. Thanks for being on St. Louis Speaks podcast. I look forward to seeing you when you get back to St. Louis. That's it, Umar Lee for the St. Louis Speaks podcast. Talk to you later. Peace.